All right, let's give folks a couple minutes. Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started in maybe 1 minute. We'll give folks a chance to join and log in. So please do test the chat for us and say hello in the chat, what community or an organization you're joining us from. We always like to do a couple of shout outs before we get going. So go ahead and let's see who's joining us today. I'll take a look at the chat and give you guys some shout outs. Let's see if it's working. Jeff Gao, Jeff Zakaib, Jeff joining us from Calgary. I already know Jeff. Brad Andrews, Cheryl Lee, and she's from Lift Impact Partners. Hello, Cheryl. Nice to meet you. Oh, and if you happen to know what organization, where your organization is situated on traditional Indigenous communities, let us know too. And if you don't know, this is a good opportunity to just give it a quick Google, and then you'll always know moving forward. Derek Mans, Stagehand Calgary. Hello, Derek. Nice to have you join us. Yeah, so guys, say hello. We have a couple of minutes while folks join in before we get the party started to say hello to you and see where you're joining us from. Raman Fahim from London, Ontario. Raman? No, London, UK. Oh my goodness, what time is it there, right? probably hurts to do the math. 5 p.m. Okay, that's not bad. But thank you. You should be having a beverage on a patio right now, and you're hanging out with us talking about systems change and social finance. So we'll do our best to entertain you. Sipping tea. Okay. Yes, I don't want to presuppose that everybody enjoys their alcoholic beverage the same way I do. No judgment, but we blame COVID for that one. All right. Okay, so we will get the party started. I think there's a couple more folks trickling in, but we have a very packed agenda today, and I'm so excited because HelpSeeker never gets to talk about systems innovation and systems change. We have to always balance the social problems that we're tackling with and the tech and data. But today is actually a really interesting topic for us that is really grounding in how we do our work. So I'm also excited to get into the discussion as well. So I will get the party started here with introductions and giving you a sense of the agenda for today. And hopefully you can see my slides, and I'm seeing nods from my colleagues. But yeah, welcome to Navigating Financial Trends and Social Impact Investing today. Land acknowledgement to just ground us. For HelpSeeker, we're on Treaty 7 territories, and I'm giving you a screenshot of a map of the Canadian tundra, and that's intentional because I'm going to be referencing ecosystems and interconnections today. We're talking about social finance, we're talking about social impact, and we're talking about systems change. And nothing tells us this more than the climate change we're witnessing in the Canadian tundra ecosystem, or taiga ecosystem, that's quite unique to our country and spans Turtle Island as well. So yeah, with that being said, I will give you a little intro on today's speakers. There's my picture before COVID. I said I'm the co-founder and CEO of HelpSeeker, and I'm going to be your host today. We've got Bradford Turner, and P.S. he and I are not married. You might notice we have the same last name, but we're actually not married or not related at all, not brother or sister. He just happens to have my married last name. And he's the founder and managing director at the sector, and he's going to tell you more about what the sector does. But I met Bradford just a couple of months ago going through due diligence at HelpSeeker. So I'm super impressed with their work, and it's kindred spirit, despite the non-relation from a last name perspective. And then Bina, who I said, I love her picture in this, and not to embarrass you, Bina, but that basically exemplifies the force in nature that she is, because she, again, has been joining the sector, working on systems change, but comes from a background in management consulting and Deloitte, E&Y, and is just that systems thinker that the sector desperately needs to move us forward in a much more disruptive direction than to actually get the change going that we need in communities. Oops. So a little bit about HelpSeeker for those of you that don't know us, and it won't be too much information here, but we focus on technology and data as it applies to systems change on complex social challenges. So a little bit of a screenshot of some of the products that we've developed specifically to advance complex systems change as it pertains to things like addictions and mental health, or homelessness, affordable housing, etc. Certified B Corp, if folks are familiar with that certification. And we primarily work at the community and systems levels. We were fortunate enough to have had support from the Digital Supercluster and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. But yeah, check out our stuff if you're not familiar with HelpSeeker and our work in data and systems change. But that's a little bit about us. More importantly, though, is our webinar partners today. And so I'm going to hand it over to Bradford to give you a sense of the sector and walk you through the agenda for, or the landscape, I should say, around social finance in Canada to ground us in the discussion. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Alina. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, honoring us with your time and your presence. And it's also an honor for the sector to be here partnering with HelpSeeker in providing this important webinar and broader concept in terms of really addressing system change and social finance as both emerging disciplines, perspectives, portfolios of work through many different societal and ecosystem actors, and really identifying the need for these two energies, philosophies, and portfolios to come together as much as possible to truly achieve long-term, long-lasting, transformational impact in society. With that said, the sector is a management consulting company headquartered in Toronto that focuses on exactly just that, really enforcing systems change thinking, developing methodologies and approaches to enable social finance to be distributed in and among systems change practitioners and assuring that it's a valuable tool enacting long-term societal change with a focus on the communities that need it most. So absolute pleasure to be here, and very much looking forward to getting through the presentations today and to the Q&A and hearing from all of you. So to start with an overview of the current landscape, let's start with really defining systems change. What are we even talking about in terms of a system in the way that we're referencing it? You'll hear that term used many times throughout this discussion, and it's not only used to define actual systems in terms of technology, in terms of knowledge transfer. It's also, really looking at systems of perspective, of prevailing ideologies, philosophies in society. How are they rooted? How do they influence more defined and infrastructure and interactions between businesses and companies and formalized organizations in society? And how do those core fundamental paradigms, principles, philosophies, cultures need to be challenged and need to be re-envisioned in order to enable systems to actually utilize social finance, in this case, for lasting change in society? So systems change. Systems change can be defined as shifting component parts of a system and the pattern of interactions between these parts to ultimately form a new system that behaves in a qualitatively and quantifiably different way. I mean, we navigate interdependent webs of systems every day in our lives, which have complex interactions and unique relationships. For example, a family, a community, a nation. Likewise, our transportation systems, our food systems, our cities, and our infrastructure. thinking systematically and applying that to social finance before jumping into the finance, before jumping into the capitalism, to the venture capital precepts in which that discipline is somewhat derived, really involves seeing the whole rather than just the parts, the patterns, the change, rather than just the static snapshots of organizations or of societal problems, of understanding the key interconnections within a system, but also between the systems, and taking the time in order to give organizations, collaboratives, and ecosystem actors that space and that opportunity to be convened, acknowledge their differences, their gaps in communication, their languages, their cultures, and come out with better ideas and probing those assumptions. So an example of one of the systems that, if we have time in the Q&A, I can give you a really cool case study on an initiative that we're working on, is systems surrounding early childhood and early education. I mean, it's impossible for just one organization or individual to be able to hold all of the perspectives and moving parts of a system at the same time. The icon here is a little small, but in this example, you would see how the objectives of any kind of effective social finance strategy that's going to address early childhood and early training in education for children really needs to take into consideration and understand the underpinning cultures, philosophies, limitations and capacity faced by parents and caregivers, the sector as a whole, in terms of the definition of it as an economic unit in society, researchers and academics, governments and their support, businesses and employees and how they interact with the system and they depend on that system. And of course, those who need it the most, the communities and the children. And without a clear-cut understanding of the needs of all of those actors and the long-term integration into a truly better system, we should not be deploying social finance yet into organizations that focus on this kind of thematic issue. Next slide, please. So what is systems change if we break it down as a bit of a typology? And then how does that result in effective management consulting approaches and the delivery of projects? Well, what does systems change actually look like? I mean, how do you apply systems change? Well, applying systems change is an approach to complex challenges that can help decision makers pinpoint critical actions on which to focus, to identify more effective solutions and better understand the cascading impacts of various interventions, various organizations, the purpose inherent in social finance. There's many routes and tools to apply these kind of strategies that we use as consultants, but three general elements really include, and whether those approaches are a future practices mapping, patterns mapping, systems change mapping, in each one you'll find determining points of leverage that are the required points for transformations to occur and deepening that understanding in the systems and the patterns, the interconnections that will shift to being the most effective is a critical tenet to any project design. Second to that, learning what drives change and embracing complexity and the insights of past and present examples from all of the ecosystem actors is an absolute precondition to establishing an effective systems change project. And then lastly, effectively aligning the change agents from these respective actors to mobilize action, deepening engagement and collaboration with the range of stakeholders in the system toward a path in which each is uniquely motivated and has a distinct role to play in shaping that change. In terms of what shifts are required to achieve systems change, Bina will address that later on in her presentation. The enablers that are required and structured to address the barriers to systems change will also be addressed later on. And I guess in the Canadian context, I'll just give a little bit of a setting in terms of how we're going to be speaking about funders for systems change. So as we look at the social finance market, the newly evolving social finance fund and all the capital that's starting flowing into this space, and excitingly so, what's happening with systems change? Well, we largely see this as being led by foundations, their impact thesis really starting to ensure that the pipeline of projects of these organizations looking at defining their long-term strategies this way are inherent in the Canadian landscape. And we're here to, provide a webinar that just emphasizes the need of combining the two. Next slide, please. So we've also already covered a lot of that actually in my last statement, but when we compare the landscape for Canadian social finance and systems change, social finance by definition being an approach to mobilizing private capital that delivers a social dividend and an economic return to achieve social and environmental goals, to mobilize private capital for social good, creating opportunities for investors to finance projects that benefit society, and for community organizations to access new sources of funds. And while that is an incredible mandate and an exciting utilization of a cross-disciplinary framing of entrepreneurial finance, policy setting, social and community services, it does have an inherent focus on profitability and extraction, and in that does carry with it a warning sign in terms of the long-term success of systems change thinking and implementation. And when we look at the 6 points of funding, policy, geography, the pipeline of opportunities, ecosystem support, and the implementation of projects, we do see differences. We see that social finance is really centralizing and has a dedicated ministry to forwarding it from a policy and a funding perspective. Systems change is still more ad hoc in its practice, and we're seeing granting and foundations really try to fill in that gap. Social finance, we're seeing really focus on distribution through intermediaries, but at the end of the day, the organizational level, it's still its trigger for impact. Where systems change, we're finding really pools in terms of thinking and policy setting at a regional or municipal government level, and then its trigger for impact is really cultural, the way it embeds itself in the prevailing socio-cultural trends of the day. And in terms of implementation and ecosystem support, both are in their infancy of uptake as a solidified and integrated philosophy in the broader system in the Canadian market. And then part of those, a disparaging element between the two of them would be, we see midterm thinking all too often in social finance. So, and by its very nature, finance requires terms for repayment. And you cannot have the long-term thinking inherent with the philosophical change perspective in systems change. Next slide, please. So what does social finance look like in Canada? Well, it couldn't be a better time to be thinking about social finance in Canada. The Social Finance Fund, which is or strategy, which is $755 million strategy, which has been spearheaded by ESDC to change the nature of the social finance market in Canada over the course of the next 10 years. 400 million of that to be deployed over the first 5 years in the form of the Social Finance Fund, wherein we'll see Employment and Social Development Canada won't directly fund social purpose organizations, the actual implementers of the changing in community services that is a foundation for system change, but rather will deploy this capital through 3 wholesalers. And those wholesalers are Boan Social Impact, Fond de Finance Sociale, and Cap Finance and Realize Capital Partners. And these 3 wholesalers are selected to manage the fund. And what they will do is they'll invest that capital in different existing and emerging social finance intermediaries across Canada, such as community loans funds, social venture capital funds, affordable housing funds, and credit unions. So you can see the critical success factor to the overall initiative that these emerging and existing social finance intermediaries that will manage this capital will take a systems change perspective in terms of their investment strategies and the catalytic impact that this program ultimately creates. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of reinforcing data, and obviously we're in 2023, but some points taken from some definitive work that was done in 2021 to really support the investment readiness program, the first support granting initiative to set up the demand side of the social finance market, the organizations that will exist to absorb that capital. As of 2021, and this was a wonderful report, the State of Social Finance put out by the Table of Impact Practitioners, more than 130 social finance intermediaries had already been identified in Canada at that point in time with assets under management of $1 billion. And well, it's tough to see on this chart, about 75% of that capital was being invested into, in aggregate, nonprofits, charities, for-profit social enterprises, nonprofit co-ops, for-profit co-ops, with about 25% of that going elsewhere. So great precedent for the demand side to inherently be set up for systems change thinking, but also a warning sign that the conditions in these organizations that are on the demand side really do need to be addressed through effective support, consulting services, to have them ready to absorb that capital and apply systems change perspectives. Next slide, please. And just reinforcing that was another great set of data produced by the Social Venture Exchange in their annual Impact Investor Survey report in 2021, with the most important takeaway from this being that in Canada, 41% of sampled investors, while they strongly agreed that they would invest in charities and nonprofits, of that 41%, 84% of the foundations strongly or somewhat agreed. So a significant component of the overall availability of capital, even insofar as 2021 pre-social finance fund was ready to support this kind of work. Foundations being the leader and the leader and supporting, granting levers of social change in the Canadian market. It's very encouraging to see all these numbers come together, and at the same time, there couldn't be more of an urgent need in order to ensure that these programs are coming together to enable the Social Finance Fund to be as effective in the way we all need it to be, in being the catalytic initiative in our country, leading to a more equitable and fair society.
Thanks so much. I was taking notes and thinking, man, I have to change my presentation now because I forgot about that good point. I wanted to take my perspective and add it as one of these social purpose organizations that is the kind of the targeted beneficiary, if you will, of the Social Finance Fund. And I wanted to reflect a little bit on that as an organization that works at this cross section of social and private, right? So that we are an actual social enterprise that works at being financially sustainable, but has a mandate around social innovation. And my reflection on that has been there's these missing components of the ecosystem for entities like myself to actually have that maximum impact in community. And I wanted to share a little bit about what I'm seeing is essentially missing currently in the ecosystem to make that happen. And I'm not sure if that role is something the intermediaries will take on, or if it's something that is truly a novel role for this ecosystem to transform. So with that caveat, I wanted to start with a bit of an analogy, and Bradford and Bina, first, we're really confused about this, why I'm talking about environmental ecosystems, but to me, I just love talking in these bigger, more complex systems that really inspire us to think differently about human ecosystems. And of course, we live in a very interconnected world, and the climate disasters, the fires that have been happening across the country are really telling us that that's exactly the lens that we might need to have on moving the social finance forward in a novel way as well. So I wanted to start with this analogy, and in the world of technology, which is where HelpSeeker lives, the ecosystem around innovation, technology innovation, is really borrowing from the concept of the rainforest. And if you think about the rainforest, you've got tons and tons of species diversity, so tons of biodiversity. You've got lots of activity. There's a lot of nutrients that are flowing in and out of the ecosystem. There's just a lot of activity. It's obviously hot, humid, etc. Of course, we don't live in near any rainforest, with the exception of Vancouver, or or parts of the BC Lower Mainland. However, we do have a country that is tied together by the taiga landscape. And so I want to just play off of that analogy and talk a little bit about that concept of the ecosystem components and where the social finance comes in. Is it potentially an energy source that is now adding to this ecosystem's diversity potentially, but also thinking about where social value, right? So where does that energy get transformed into something new or something valuable to the ecosystem? So of course, I'll remind you about your biology 101 class, where we've got the producers of social value. So those that are probably on the front lines of creating social value, direct with the beneficiaries, the intended beneficiaries of social impact. So people that are experiencing social challenges. So those that are directly interacting with them are probably the closest to the issues. They're probably those that we might consider to be the producers of social value. And then, of course, we've got the primary consumers. We might look at the folks that are benefiting from the services provided by that initial producer of social value, and they might be the clients of services or the customers, if you will. In capitalist terms. But of course, we've got secondary and even tertiary consumers of social value. So those that are benefiting the community around that particular family, the broader ecosystem around them that's benefiting from the social value that they're consuming as well. So there's this laddering of impact, if you will. And then, of course, we've got our decomposers and those of us that evaluate, that recycle social value, that take the learnings and probably change systems as well. So none of these terms are negative terms. Everybody has a role to play, right? And that's my main framing for the next part of my my talk here. But one of the things that I've really reflected on in relation to this ecosystem, natural ecosystem analogy, is also the concept of species, or specifically the idea of keystone species. So those that are really integral to the ecosystem. If you remove the keystone species, the whole thing falls apart. I think we can probably all relate to some of these keystone species. Bees are, everybody loves talking about how when the bee falters, the entire ecosystem can start to really fall apart. We've got indicator species, so those that are, once we hit a critical mass of entropy in a system, sometimes there's species that start to disappear or migrate, and they're telling us that the system's in trouble. For instance, we've got our endangered, and then of course we've got our invasive species. And Europeans coming to Turtle Island have tons of examples of species we've introduced that have become invasive as well. But speaking of this concept of the keystone, whereby the ecosystem functions super, super well when that keystone species is there, when that role is functional in the community, that's the one I wanted to speak about. And the concept of adding social value and really doubling down on those keystone entities becomes really essential, because let's be honest, the 755 million is going to go by like that. In fact, and if you attended our last webinar, we talked about the $1 trillion that goes into social impact every year. So you've got $1 trillion and you've got 755 million. So I know it sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually not. In the grand scheme of this ecosystem that we're trying to move in a different direction, that investment has to be so tight. It has to be so smart and strategic. And narrowing it down on where that social value is best generated is going to be really a really tough gig for the fund of funds and for the intermediaries to define. Because again, we've got so many entities that are active in that $1 trillion ecosystem. So we've got 80,000 charities by the last count. We've got double that when you account for nonprofits. I have no idea how many social enterprises like HelpSeeker there are. I'm not sure there's a list, but count that for a couple more thousand. You've got informal and civil society groups. So when you actually take up the 755 and let's say you equitably divide amongst all of these social purpose organizations, there's probably a couple dollars each that you're going to end up with. So what is that money is actually going to do? And of course, we know that every intermediary has to take a cut of the 755 million. Yet the problems, right, the social ecosystem dysfunction, where you don't have these keystone species, or where the keystone entities that I mentioned before don't exist to really generate that maximum value, those issues are going to continue to be there. So if at the end of the $755 million, we still have persistent or increasing social needs, we still have lack of positive outcomes at the systems levels, we still have inequality and disparities, when feedback from stakeholders are telling us things are not getting better, we still have collaboration and coordination that are not happening at the scale they need to be. We have a lack of scalability and sustainability, and we have external factors and systemic challenges that are still plaguing this ecosystem. Then that $755 million might have actually added to the problem, not resolved or catalyzed new solutions. So I'm cautioning those that are making these decisions about where that money needs to be strategically invested. And I would venture to say that it may not be every social enterprise, right? It's probably going to be a really special type of entity. So I wanted to, we're not a systems planner organization, but there are systems planner organizations out there. And I wanted to make a pitch for these as being one of the keystone entities in this new ecosystem we're trying to build. To give you an example of systems planner organizations as a different kind or a specific kind of SPOs, right? So these are terms that exist already, but I don't think we've made the connection between the technical aspects of systems transformation on the ground. So the entities that are actually planning which organizations need to be put in what roles on the ground to actually incentivize the system to move in a different direction. That's actually a very specific role in the ecosystem. And not every community has one of these or a couple of these that are working on complex social challenges. As a good example of these, Homework Trust in Edmonton is a systems planner organization. They have very specific capabilities, right? So they're in charge of building system strategies, social system transformation strategies. They design and coordinate the local ecosystem. They manage information management, the information management system and data. They do the stakeholder local engagement to align everybody to this objective and coordinate different funding streams as well. So they act as a type of intermediary at that where the social value is being created. So they're very close to the social value. They know exactly the clients by name. They know the clients in terms of needs, and they're constantly monitoring the other SPOs, the other social purpose organizations, to make sure that they're doing their jobs aligned with that broader objective around systems change. Innovation, knowledge sharing, advocacy, performance management, and quality assurance. These are really essential competencies of this type of SPO. And I would venture to say a really strategic investment would be in these keystone SPOs in particular. And without these, I've also cautioned us that money is going to get spread really thinly and not necessarily make the impact that it needs to. So I'm pitching this as a concept that might be a value add to the conversations moving forward. So with that being said, a plug here too that efficient resource allocation, collaboration and partnerships, focus on long-term sustainability, impact measurement, evaluation, adaptability, and learning. These are going to be broader themes across these portfolios that are going to need to align with this concept of not just innovation for innovation's sake, but true systems innovation where, it's not about putting more cars on the road that might be electric, but it's actually changing and redesigning the city so we can walk instead of having cars. So a different type of thinking to maximize the impact of these investments. And I'll hand it back to Bradford and Bina for their thoughts on impact investing and systems change alignment.
Wonderful, thanks, Alina. Great backdrop Bradford provided on the social finance ecosystem, the current landscape of it and the direction that it's taking. And Alina, thanks for your perspectives in terms of how to enable the effectiveness of it through some of these keystone organizations, these SPOs, as you've described, and these system planning organizations that can really enable that systems change and take on that kind of multifaceted approach that's pulling on the various actors within the ecosystem to enable that change, because it won't be a isolated organization that can mobilize a system. For my part of this this presentation or webinar, want to actually bring it and back to one of the key kind of enablers for system change, and really want to recognize the role that HelpSeeker is emerging to play in the system, which is around creating data systems that really inform mobilization of social impacts that are really tackling the challenges that we're seeing today in society. And before I go there, just want to provide that backdrop of the current landscape in terms of how data is utilized in our current social systems. This is actually probably broader than that, but I'll keep it to that piece in terms of how it is utilized to inform decision making. So for most social systems across the country and many parts of this world, we're utilizing data that's quite siloed, disparate, fragmented. It's being wrong in terms of there's data quality issues, or it is collecting also, frankly, the wrong type of data to make informed decisions around creating impact. Many data sets are incomplete, non-continuous, or non-integrated to really understand what's occurring in the system that's creating some of the outcomes that we're seeing today. And given the lack of holistic kind of data gathering, integrated data sources, much of it can't be explained. What's really occurring too is that all of this together is really misguiding program decision making in terms of taking the direction there, and also funding in terms of how programs are funding. A lot of disincentives to really try to create systems change or mobilize impact. Funding tends to be disparate across organization to organization, so a very siloed approach, which is often causing competition. Folks are claiming to be the owner of an outcome that's achieved, or an owner of a case, in order to access that funding, and then deliver on programming that does optimize that type of mechanism that's in place. So we can see how this is creating that chaos in our systems and not really resulting to impact. So we do need to move towards more of that aligned, integrated, interoperable data that's really producing that meaningful, insightful information, and not just on an individual organization basis. It is looking at it in a holistic, systematic perspective. So if we go to the next slide, it is quite, well, I would say right now in terms of trends in data analysis, this was across any kind of sector. We often have this traditional approach in terms of utilizing data for analytics. Organizations would determine, what are the questions that we want to seek answers to, and systems, or IT systems in this case, would be developed in terms or structured to answer those specific questions. So it was a very structured, kind of just repeatable process, not really permitting for opportunity to explore root causes or how things can be improved. As we see with platforms evolving over time, introductions of solutions such as HelpSeeker in the market, platforms are enabling that discovery, and it becomes more of this iterative exploratory analysis. And organizations are, what are the questions that we should be asking or could be asking in order to create those improvements to those that we serve. So with that, that presents that opportunity in the next slide to really enable system innovation, system change, because we are having the capabilities to get to the heart of the problems and understand how we can solve these complex, wicked problems that are occurring in society with more robust data sets and tools. Also, in terms of having that opportunity to explore solutions and developing system solutions that can address those challenges that we see. And as we've all mentioned, this is a collective approach across the ecosystem of the sector. We often refer to bringing in together an ecosystem to create that collective impact, because it's not going to be one individual organization or solution that really can mobilize change in a system. It requires the corralling of multiple actors to mobilize that. And with data systems in place that are reporting on a more robust, timely, insightful process, decision makers now understand, will have the opportunity to better understand where impact's being created, where are they lagging, and also in addressing that through models, through programs, to continuously mobilize systems towards impact. So if you go to the next slide, I think Bradford had mentioned, we really see the social finance system or strategy that's being rolled out as that catalyst. And there's a couple of ways that we view this. Social finance is that mechanism to integrate social innovation into systems in a sustainable manner. So it really takes that balance. So when we talk about sustainable, it is looking at financially sustainable, self-sustainable models that can be integrated into the system, but also sustainable in terms of serving the population that it is aiming to address, being accessible to them and having that incorporated into its operational model and seeing that longevity over time. On the other side of this too is the impact piece. So measuring those impacts to determine the effectiveness, and is it really addressing some of those complex or wicked problems that we've described? And together that creates forces of system change, because we're now bringing about models that are performance-based, which may not have always occurred before, but there is that incentive or that push to create that mechanism in the system. And then also having that reliable data to demonstrate that impacts are being realized by the social innovation. So with that context in mind, if we go to the next slide, there are some challenges that the system will face in terms of integrating social finance instruments and strategies. We still are working with the big beasts of our existing market forces and systems, very much embedded in colonial capitalism. And so it requires the challenges to create those mind shifts or paradigm shifts to have more of this balance in financial performance that we generally see in traditional investment markets, but balancing that with the impact side in these complicated systems. We talk about the devolution of system perspective, and I know we provided some definitions and examples of that. But when we do talk about systems, we're not talking about like national systems, or it's not necessarily at that geographical magnitude piece, that perspective that we refer to here. Often many systems are going to have to be developed at the community level to really enable social change, because we are dealing with some unique complexities from community to community. So it's bringing into that system at that community level. In terms of having sporadic system growth or components of growth, again, this refers to that balance. The overemphasis on impacts versus financial performance is not going to be conducive to create an effective social finance ecosystem. So that balance just needs to be kept in mind. And those that are supporting or allocating funds in the system just need to ensure those incentives are in place to create that balance. And as we've all talked about, referred to as keystone organizations or scaling organizations, these ecosystem development pieces need to take place in order to integrate social innovation to address the complexities that we're facing within the system. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of change that's required in existing perspectives, in behaviors, in decision making, and that time also needs to be invested in. So that goes to my next slide, where systems change, I think this is obvious, does require change across many system stakeholders. And in this instance, we're actually referring to the system of social finance. So we've alluded to the investor markets having that change in terms of a balanced perspective. Traditional markets, although impact investment has been emerging and it's becoming more known, just in having those incentives that are aligned in investment decision making will enable this. In terms of government, current systems that are funded by government may have opposing forces to structure social innovation in this manner. As I alluded to, funding on legacy data or how data was collected and analyzed and utilized before may be a barrier or a challenge to really mobilize an effective social finance ecosystem. Ventures traditionally, as investees, look to have more of that emphasis on their financial performance. So it takes that mind shift to really have that balance too, and really recognize the efforts that it takes in terms of really integrating into a system and being part of an ecosystem. Not-for-profits that are exploring this space of social innovation and launching social enterprises themselves. A lot of change management at the ground level. These are organizations that may not have the business kind of competencies and capabilities that would be traditionally seen in our competitive markets. But in essence, there needs to be that business acumen instilled and managerial decision-making that's integrated if a social enterprise is launched. These are organizations that in many cases have been pushed to reduce their administrative costs as much as possible. But now when approaching investors, it's almost the opposite. They have to demonstrate that they have strong managerial functions within their organization. Corporate supports the mind shifts there in terms of adapting to this overall kind of environment, this ecosystem that's being built, probably looking at broader definitions of ESG in order to mobilize this. The intermediaries, Alina had alluded to some of this, introducing intermediaries that really can support the system. And then the communities themselves, in the way that they'll be engaged in terms of building out social innovation, the way that they will receive services, the expectations around that, and their advocacy to push for innovation that is in an effective manner. So in this last slide, just referring to some of the attributes of investment opportunities in social finances, we'll see a change in asset classes. There will be thematic focuses on different types of social innovation to invest in. Mentioned the community-based innovation, so place-based funding, having the governance and the representation across the ecosystem to ensure that social innovation is enabled in an effective manner, and also just being mindful of those risks. And finally, I know I skipped impact measurement, but that's the important piece here in terms of bringing in that data to measure those impacts and demonstrate the outcomes of the social innovations being introduced.
Thanks so much, Bina. That's awesome. I was getting texts to hear that. It's like, wow, you've finally found your people, Alina. This is stuff that that I sometimes annoy my teammates chatting about, because folks just want to get practical, but this is super essential framing for all the work that we're doing. So thank you guys for a wonderful insights today. We do have some questions, or an anonymous attendee at least, talking about this parallel between natural environment and a critical systems lens cautions, saying that, you know, we're right, or we're right to be potentially, I don't know about concerned, but something along those lines. Do we have any other folks that want to chime in here while we're checking out the chat? Yes, we have a couple questions around whether the webinar is recorded and whether we're sending the recording out. And yes, and somebody's saying, oh, actually using some technology to record as well. Yeah, absolutely. Free. I don't know about you guys, but we're always excited for people to take the insights into their next meeting. Other folks that have any questions or any additional areas that you want us to dig into a little bit further? We have one hand up. Yeah, so actually, Aluko, do you have the ability to give folks the chat enablement? And Jeff, I see your hand up. I'm just not, maybe, let's see. There's folks that are interested in Bradford's ECE case studies. Why don't we have you chat about that, Bradford, while we figure out the giving Jeff ability to chat?
Absolutely. And Lynn, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, what I would delve further into is I'm working on a project right now, which is designing outcomes-based contracts that will most likely take the form of social impact bonds to scale a program that focuses in children's mental health in ECE. Currently delivered through about 150 sites across Canada, and the social financing should help to enable that program to scale up to about 300 sites over the course of the next 5 years, but really innovate internally in terms of its utilization of data infrastructure, data analytics, different technologies to really modularize the programming, reach communities that currently would have been unreachable. But the systems change perspective is really fascinating, the way that we've really had to halt the social finance until the paradigms around systems change are truly determined. Is the framing really focused on the long-term inequity in the children's mental health system in Canada? Will we truly help to redefine that system to be more inclusive of the communities who have been previously underserved? Will we decolonialize prevailing philosophies around mental health and around the need for a certain definition of mental health in our society? Will we look at the timing and the external environment that these kids face post-COVID on a day-to-day basis and see that really integrated into policies and human resources and governance of organizations? So while the social finance is going to be an incredibly amazing practical tool to find additional resourcing, and with the terms and the accountabilities that come with operationalizing the throughput process in that program to yield the coupon rate for the investors, which is being agreed upon, would it also run away and continually reinforce inequitable systems if the systems change framing wasn't completed as a precondition for moving forward with the structuring of the social impact bonds?
Thanks, that's great. Jeff, I think you've got the ability to ask your question live if you unmute, I believe. Go ahead. If it works.
Hi.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry because I have an auditing coming, so that's why I have not much time. But the thing is, we just want to set up the social enterprises to support our mission here. And currently, we do some of the production, the investigation, and try to contact the other organizations, try to see which business model will be more suitable for us. Because for us, we need, our main mission is to provide the housing to indigenous people, indigenous community, especially on the Brantford city. After the end of the service agreement, we always have the funding issues. So that's why we need the social enterprises. That's just a thought to want to get more fund to supplement or support our main mission. So that's why we are thinking about. That's why I want to get more information from you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, well, since you're working with First Indigenous communities, I'll tell you that there is the Housing Accelerator Fund that's currently active. Doesn't require you to be a social enterprise per se, but it does require you to work with the First Nation, the reserve community, or the First Nations that's in charge of that particular the land use in a particular community. And it's a major investment. It's actually significantly larger than the social finance funds. It's about $4 billion that's currently active. So if anybody knows municipalities, small communities that are struggling with affordable housing or housing in general, many First Nations communities don't have housing, period, never mind affordable housing. That fund is currently active, and it's only you only have a window of about 40 days left. They only gave people 45 days, and it just started last week, so actually less than that. So I'd encourage you to look up CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund and get going on that application. If you need more information, we can send you that along after the webinar. But maybe on the social finance, and since we've got the management consulting experts on this exact issue, Bina or Bradford, do you want to take that one as well? How would somebody get started?
Thank you.
Did you want to go back?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's a number of ways to provide information, Jeff, that's going to be timely for you. Bina did put my email on the chat, so please do follow up with me after this this conversation. There are a plethora of social finance funds and social finance intermediaries, foundations that are creating community bonds, different kinds of blended finance approaches in order to answer the very thematic issue that you're speaking of. So it would actually be difficult to really narrow that down without learning more about your initiative and exactly how you're hoping to deploy. But incredible work, very central to the investment thesis of the broader social finance fund from the federal government, and certainly is going to be a key focus of the wholesalers and therein the intermediaries, which they'll lend the capital to. And already, even outside of that, that was already one of the main focuses on the social finance in Canada historically, where the capital pools. Hugely important and timely issue, and I commend you for your focus on that work. And please follow up with me after, and I can provide you much more specific and detailed information.
Okay, I think we've got time. I was going to say maybe one more, but I don't think we do. Actually, we'll wrap it up for today. But I think you guys got a little bit of taste of what the sector does. I'm so excited to have met you guys and build this connection with you. I just think we're kindred spirits, whether we know it or not. So I'm again looking forward to our next webinar with you guys. This one's going to be probably going back to the more of the social problem side of things. So the complex social challenge that we have around the housing affordability crisis. And again, just pushing this opportunity we have with the Housing Accelerator Fund, but also highlighting the challenge of municipalities that are on that smaller side. They don't have the big capabilities of data science teams to put together some of these applications. So we're going to try to give you as many tools as possible to take advantage of these opportunities, but also building your internal capability to put units on the ground as well. For those of you that are Cardo members, a reminder that we have the online synthetics around the drug crisis webinar, or closed door, I should say, with Chief Dale McPhee happening July 26th. And that's primarily, and those of you that aren't aware, the ability of pharmaceutical grade research compounds that are coming through the drug supply across Canada and adding to the fentanyl overdose crisis are now shifting to new types of compounds that we're not even being able to test effectively. So the pace of innovation on the bad side of things and the drug trafficking networks are changing really rapidly right now. So just making sure that folks are aware of what's going to be trickling down in the community if it's already not, if it's not already there, I should say. So a reminder about that for July 26th, and we'll be in touch for our next one. Stay in touch and stay well. Thank you again, Bina and Bradford. And yeah, we'll look forward to the next one. Thanks, guys.